So hey, yeah. So thanks for joining us, Vinay. I'm Daryl.
Hi,
I'm
Daryl.
Nicole, and these are our SEEDS participants for 2021.
Do you guys want to hop on and say hello? Or got someone waving there?
I haven't got a mic, but of course, my name's Danil.
Hey,
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So we've got Danelle there. We got Hibba, and we've got Hibba's sister. Is it Ramasa? Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. How's
It is Ramesa.
Ramasa? I was
Hey,
close.
Nice to meet you.
Almost.
Hi.
It's every time I come up.
So cool. These things are always a bit awkward, kicking these things off, and we're just starting these out, so they're kind of trial and error, the industry Q&As. But no, thank you again, Vinay, for giving up your time to speak to us. I remember I had a Q&A with you before as part of Mrs. C's, and it was really insightful. And some of the things you said in that still stick with me to this day. And I quote them in like kind of other meetings. I'm like, well, Vinay Patel once said this, and it really stuck with me.
I mean, I hope I remember it too. That'd be handy. So I'm glad someone else like.
It was the quote that really stuck with me was I'm obviously paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of the issue with some contemporary theatre is it asks the questions we already know the answers to.
Yeah. Yes. I'm interested to see how that shifts in the post-pandemic world, or if it does. But yes.
Yeah. Cool. So I don't know how we're gonna we'll just roll the punches, but Vinay, would you mind just introducing yourself, even though you need no introduction, and just maybe just speaking a bit about your work today, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm Vinay Patel. I write for theatre, film, and telly. I started off in theatre, and I did. My first piece of telly was a one-off drama for the BBC called Murdered by My Father in 2016. And then I went on to write for Doctor Who for a few seasons. And now, like everyone in telly, you have a billion things in development, and we'll see if anything actually happens. But I think it should do. But and at the moment I'm writing lots of plays. I've got a Chekhov adaptation set on a spaceship, which should hopefully happen next year if I'm lucky, and writing a play about Star Wars, and I have a Star Wars themed t-shirt. Yeah.
Big fan of space and sci-fi. Hence, so with that said, then was it kind of like I don't want to say dream come true, but how was it working on Doctor Who?
Really intense, because you're playing in someone else's world, which is always tricky, but it's not just the world of that. A showrunner, so a showrunner is a person who has responsibility for sort of the tone, the shape, and the people who work on a thing, and how it's presented overall. Like they get to call the shots basically. And if you're writing for someone else's show, that showrunner has an opinion on things, and with Doctor Who, everyone has an opinion on things because it's been going for so long, obviously. And so you're not just playing with other people's ideas, you're playing with a history that's like over 50-year history. So that has its own challenges, and I was the junior writer in that room, I think, when we did it, so I was a bit terrified. Also, like, I think, yeah, me and Mallory Blackman was first writers of colour on that show as well, which I actually didn't realise until afterwards. Like, oh man, that's pretty intense. But yeah, I love being able to write for a mainstream audience, like being able to tell stories that I care about through the lens of a show like that is like, that I think that's a dream come true. I think we had this conversation before of how I'm really interested in the politics for me of a story isn't just what the story says, it's who you send that story in front of and how you find that audience for that story. Yeah, with Doctor Who, it was, hey, I don't think a lot, like with my first episode, I don't think a lot of people know about the partition of India. I'd love to do that as a story. It would probably end up on like BBC 4 at like 10 o'clock at night. So getting to do a prime time slot with Who was an absolute dream. But yeah, it's you read a lot of forums, and maybe you should be like, oh man, I need to know everything about everything, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble. And Chris, who runs it, he said something to me, which I try to remember, which is the thing about Doctor Who fans is if they hate it, they'll only watch it 3 times. Like, great, that's the thing to hold in mind and not worry too much about. But yeah, no, it taught me a lot, and I'm really grateful that I got that opportunity.
I mean, it was, I recently watched the episode, and you're right. I mean, it's a subject matter that I don't think many people are aware of, and I learned a lot from watching it. 31-year-old man, I took a lot from it. And sorry, say that again.
Oh, so I was just saying, well, that's kind of the reason to do it, because it's not your fault that you don't know that. Do you know what I mean? It's a thing of like, why would you? And that's like a structural issue. I've said structural already. Sorry, I was typing all of that. Just over 5 minutes. But yes.
No, but it's true though. I mean, like you were saying. I think the recent series of Doctor Who has, really worked on, its representation and the kind of stories it does tell. And I think what was so interesting about your episode was the kind of the human element of it. You know what I mean? Like if you put the sci-fi to the side, it's a very human episode. Like, and without spoiling it for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, I've all sent you guys the link in your email, so check it out if you haven't. But without ruining kind of the twist, it kind of leads us one way, but then obviously, I'm trying not to give anything away. But yeah, it's a very human episode, which is always nice to see in a show kind of like that, where you can sort of merge those two worlds together, like sci-fi and drama.
Yeah, and I think I'm really interested in that generally. I love sci-fi. Like as a kid, I just read loads and loads of books and write lots of terrible stories on forums. So that's definitely a way, if any of you are doing that, that is totally a legit way to get into the industry. Like so many bad like Star Trek rip-off stories sitting on an ancient server somewhere probably. But like I love the idea of the combination of potential and people is why I like theatre. I feel like in a theatre space anything can happen at any minute. And with sci-fi, I kind of feel the same with that as well. It's like you can do absolutely anything with this, and that feels like really freeing. So like with the Chekhov, that is almost entirely South Asian characters in that, because I wanted to not have to just, like I did it with Who and I had done it with a couple of plays, but I wanted to be able to have those bodies and those people and those spaces not be tied to a colonial legacy. Going, how do I literally break these people out of that space and put them in a decontent, like they're on a generation ship, which means they can't get to this planet in a few years. Their ancestors will, which felt like a lovely metaphor for the immigrant experience, but is also just a thing of going, hey, these guys are on a spaceship and they get to talk big feelings, and wouldn't that be nice to see in a theatre? And yeah, talk about their hopes and dreams and all those lovely things.
I mean, I think it's I've read some of it. Obviously, I haven't shared it because it's your new work. But what I find fascinating about it is just like, the whole complete like reimagination of it is kind of, I don't see many plays, especially many plays dealing with such kind of issues set in space. So it's an interesting place to take it, like kind of that realm.
Yeah, I think the thing is also just with Czech. Sorry, I know this is really niche for anyone young watching this, but just very quickly, I think it's a problem you'll probably come up against when any of you come into the industry, is that there are expectations and audience expectations about pieces of work. So like with Chekhov, I feel a lot of it is like, a lot of people in this country love big country houses. Like, it's like, what a beautiful setting. And it's like, in Chekhov's era, this was like elite, like super elite spaces, right? It's not like upper middle class, it's like up there. And so our relationship with those contexts are really tricky. Like and I remember like going to see plays in my school, and when it was something that was like very really, I know this sounds really bad, but it was like when it was something very old, I don't know what's going on. But then when I did see a slightly tartier production that was trying to modernize it a little bit, that did really hook me. And I think I always remember that, of how do you recontextualize stories that you feel like people will love, and especially younger people will love, but find a way to remove it from all the trappings that maybe they think have gone around it. And I think that's what I find really exciting to try and do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's kind of like how you make those stories accessible to a younger generation, a more modern generation, because I kind of agree with you. Like watching the original Cherry Orchard, reading it, studying it back in, the drama school and college and all that. Yeah, there was a lot of like, and also a lot of period dramas or from that kind of era. I'm not going to lie, I found it hard kind of engaging in the material. It wasn't that
Yeah.
accessible. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
But I think just I mean, there's a lot of sci-fi fans out there, for example. So immediately when you say it's set in space, people are like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." That's kind of something I can tap into. And I
Yeah,
think
and
it's also
and then just trying to like not make that like a joke, I guess,
yeah.
and find a way to go. How do I make this a fun thing? But yeah, I guess I'll ask it like, what is useful for me to talk to for anyone watching this in terms of like either coming into the industry or things that'd be interested to know about, whether the process is or access or the way certain things work. Like,
do any of you have any questions? Because we did say think of questions. Aha, we have a question. Yes, go for it.
Hello. Thank you for this. I've been really enjoying it. Okay. When you're brainstorming and for writing your books, where do you like to go, and what is your favorite surrounding place?
That's a great question. The last year has been quite hard for that because the places I would go is my bedroom and then my living room and then back to my bedroom again, and that's not fun. But generally, the places I really like to go are there's a LSE library, which I don't know if is open to the public anymore, but I like spaces that actually aren't that arty. I like that everyone in there was like studying finance or was going to be like a future prime minister or something. And I was just sat there. It made the creative stuff feel less massive or important in a useful way. It was like, it doesn't matter if this play is bad because other people here are doing important things. You can do your own small thing here and not worry too much about it. I like places with lots of people around me, but where I get to basically stare at a blank wall and have to force myself to come up with the things that'll be interesting to me. I really like, I'll tell you something really useful that someone told me about places is, if you've written something and you're trying to think of more ideas for it, if you go to like a gallery, like one of my teachers literally took us to, I think it was the Tate Modern, and just find a random piece of work, right? Not even one you necessarily love or think is the best thing in the world, just something you're a bit drawn to, and just sit for like half an hour, like a properly long enough amount of time. And while you're looking at that object, think about your story. And I know it sounds really, really strange, right? But it totally works because it just pulls you out of your head. I think you can get trapped in your head a little bit, especially right now. And so you just sit there and you get a little bit bored, but in a right useful way. You're bored, but you're looking at something a bit strange. I don't know modern art at all. Like, I know nothing about any of it. So I'm just going, I have no idea what this is. And then you think about your story and you look at it, and somehow it creates this weird magic alchemy that gives you loads of ideas. And I've done that loads. And every time I think I'm an idiot, like I'm just a strange person staring at an object, but every time it's helped me find something useful. So I would totally recommend that.
Great tip. Thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions? Just pop them in the group chat. If you don't feel confident enough to come on camera, if you pop them in the group chat, then we can read them out. If not, yeah. Any other questions out there?
I want to ask, what kind of key things should you avoid when writing?
Ooh, I mean, that's a tough question because it depends on. Do you mean like what you think are like common mistakes people make? Because I would give you there's a very pretentious answer I could give you, which is like, as long as it's doing the thing that you want it to do, then there are no mistakes.
Yeah.
but if you're talking about like just sort of generally, like I think you want to be careful of overindulgence. Like, it can be really easy to get really swept up in your own genius a little bit, or like or you love something a lot, and you think that because you're interested in it, other people will be interested. And I see that a lot actually with newer writers, and I did it all the time, it's a thing of going, this is inherently interesting because I find it interesting. Whereas what you got to do is try and ask yourself the question. It's the thing, again, I ask myself this all the time now, is if someone reading this didn't care at all about the things I'm interested in it, what in this story is exciting or interesting? And that might be, hey, the tension between a character making a decision. It might be the weight of something that you know is coming. Like we've seen someone with like a bat coming through a door, and we know someone's upstairs. Like, what are the things there for someone who doesn't care about the thing that you care about, that you can just make sure are always there? And that is, we talk about that in terms of just like the very basic units of drama. Like in each of your scenes, if you're writing a play or like for telly, just ask yourself, what happens in that scene? Why now? What happens if a person doesn't get it? And that's there's a playwright called David Mamet who proposed those 3 questions, and those can be a bit blunt, but I find like if you're asking yourself those questions, which again is, what does the person want in the scene? Why now? What happens if they don't get it? If you ask yourself those questions of a scene, it will always contain some sense of drama. Like it won't work for everything, but it's a good way of just drilling out some of the more excess stuff around the scene. And then another thing that I found really useful is that I used to be a reader at a theatre, and a lot of the scripts, a lot of the scenes didn't really speak to each other, by which I mean something will happen and then something else will happen and then something else will happen, and there'll be no causality. So like the thing that's happened here won't cause the thing to happen in the next scene, and that can be fine, but it can get quite dull quite quickly. So another useful thing I find to do is, in between your scenes, ask yourself if the connection between what's happening in one scene and the other is but, therefore, or and, right? So if you have a scene that's like Vinay comes on this Zoom, Vinay eats an apple, Vinay drinks a glass of water, that would be Vinay comes on this Zoom and Vinay eats an apple and Vinay drinks a glass of water. None of those things are linked to each other. But if I go, Vinay comes on this Zoom, he realizes he's hungry, he eats an apple, he starts to choke on the apple, and therefore he gets a glass of water. Suddenly there's a chain of events, and that is a bit more compelling. And then when I say but, that's like an interruption. So I could say Vinay came on the Zoom, but his camera failed. So that's about trying to find what's causing problems for people, and then what their responses to those problems are. And I see that a lot with you're right. And again, I did it all the time. You just sort of go, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. But if there's no linking those choices and those moments and creating a cause, then I think people get their mind sort of switch off quite quickly. Sorry, I know that was really rambling. Is that any use?
No, thank you. I was gonna ask, I don't know if this is like a basic question, but what do you think should be like the main focus when it comes to writing a script?
I think the main focus is you should ask yourself what compels you about it. Like, what is it that's making you want to do it? And it might take you a little time to understand it. So I think you don't have to start off knowing what the focus is. You can just play around with it, like have some characters speak to each other, throw some random things at them. And then eventually you'll sort of understand what you're interested in. And then once you've understood that, then you can kind of build your choices more around that. So I realized that a lot of the stuff I'm doing, like even when I'm trying to consciously avoid it, ends up being about home and place and identity and security. And I feel that all the time. And that will lead you to the choices that talk to that idea a lot. So the main thing, I guess, is once you understand what it is you think you're trying to write about, try and make sure that your characters and their journeys and the conflicts that they have with each other are kind of all speaking to that idea to some degree. So you might have a thing where it's gonna be really bad, I apologize, but like say you're really interested in how people like I live on this estate that's like half private ownership, half social housing, right? So it might be, I'm interested in how different types of people live together. And within that question, you know, within that idea, you might have someone who is like a rich person who's just bought like an old flat there, and they've moved out an old family, and there's an old family that's been there for 60 years, and they have a different idea of what that place means to them. And you might have a young family, you might have a bunch of students. For all of them, that place means something different, and they'll all have a different idea of what it means to like live in a communal space. Some people will be very open to other people, some people just want to reject them, you know. Sorry, again, like this is literally off the top of my head, but once you kind of have an idea of what the thing you're interested in looking and interrogating is, trying to, I think to me the most important thing then is to try and look at what your characters are doing and how do they speak to that idea, because it's very easy to go, oh, that's a really fun thing that character is doing, it might be great, but if you want it to feel rich, if you want it to, like, people will leave that theatre feeling something that they feels very full if there's a sense of unity to those ideas of what those characters are doing and what they're looking for. You don't have to hammer it home, and you absolutely, it might take you loads of time to get it, so don't worry if you kind of don't know at the start. Just kind of follow your nose a little bit and see where it leads you to interesting things. But yeah, then try and make those ideas speak to each other, and I think you'll find something really satisfying.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So how did you get into writing?
Oof. I took a very long way around, relatively, I guess. So yeah, I was always interested in writing as a kid. I didn't really see how I'd make that my life. I think I was like, oh, I'll write some books and somehow that'll make me money and I'll live my life and buy my grandma a nice big house or something. But really, I don't know, I wasn't very confident. I ended up going to study English at uni because I just didn't really know anything about books or culture, which sounds ridiculous now when I think about it, but I just sort of grew up in my family wasn't super cultural. They didn't, like, I didn't have a huge amount of books apart from like one grandparent on the other side. So for me, I had to go through a route that was very set on that being like an education route, but I don't recommend that necessarily. Like, I think that's, well, one, that's way more expensive now than it used to be, and two, it's really unnecessary. Like, I think the best and the things that got me, sorry, I know I'm slightly changing the question a little bit, but the things that I think were most useful for me for getting into writing was trying to write work with other people. So I did that when I did a master's. I did that when I first started doing scratch nights for theatre, which are where you just you put on like a 5-10 minute piece with your friends, and there's like no one's gonna jump on you if it's like bad. It's just you trying out stuff. That was more useful for me than like going to study anything formally. And I think if you're thinking about how do I get into writing, the thing that's most useful is just write loads of stuff and let a lot of it be bad, and try and be bad with other people, so you're all sharing in your own awfulness, and then one day it will get like a little bit better, and that'll be really exciting. Just because, like, I think please, like, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I assume you're asking that because you're wondering, like, my route, what has led me to be the place where I am now. And I'm saying I can save you loads of years of wondering and not having much confidence, and just saying, like, just make work with your friends as much as possible and put it out there as much as possible. Because I was a corporate filmmaker for ages. I was a headshot photographer. I worked at a really bad British version of Netflix, putting adverts into all your favorite shows. I sold popcorn on weekends. Like, I did all sorts, and all of those things were great in their own way. And they were useful for my life, but like, it definitely was me hiding from like doing any writing. So yeah, just do lots of writing basically, and don't be scared of sharing it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, got a hand up there. Go ahead.
Okay. How did you make it into the industry, and like, what was your big breakthrough? How would you make your story into like a movie or film or into theatre?
Okay, well, what to start with there? Okay, so my breaks. I don't know if I've had a theatre break really. Like I did. I guess I was attached to a theatre company who I applied to. I think maybe you'll be a little bit young for that, but it will come, and you can just, yeah. There is always some sort of call out for people to do. I think like the National Theatre has like a young person's writing thing, doesn't it? Like a playwriting thing where they try to get school age kids to write to. But yeah, basically there was a theatre company called High Tide who I was on attachment for a year, and that means basically for a year they sort of talk to me about an idea and I try and make one happen and write a play for them. And that play went on a few years later and it was fine, but people really liked that script enough, so you just got to send it to lots of people. There's lots of competitions that are asking for things, and I don't think most of them have an age limit. And from there I got lots of meeting. Oh, my cat is here, sorry. It's just, I think he was here at the last one we did, but like he's just always like very lovely. Yeah, so for me it was writing that one script that was the purest expression of everything I wanted to write. It was super cheap because it was only one person and I had no money, but like I tried to fill it with all the things I was interested in. And I think people get really excited by something that they can feel your interest in. Like craft is a thing that can come, but interest is a thing that's hard to fake. So for me, my break came from something I was fascinated in and meant a lot to me, and putting that out into the world. So that was my break into theatre, I guess. Yeah, I got my first commission from that. Someone came to see it in Edinburgh and liked it enough to give me a little bit of money to write another play, which then they didn't like, and I had to write a whole other play. So that is the same thing. Telly, I was very lucky, and in a way that's really annoying and gives no learning whatsoever, I'm afraid. So what happened was someone had read that play and I had to go pitch for a thing called Murder by My Father, which was like this film for television. Yes, good cats. And so what pitching is they will have a rough idea of something that they want, and you have to go and tell them how you would what you would do with that idea, or what you think is interesting and useful for it. So that's a good thing to kind of practice if you can. But yeah, I got that rather unexpectedly. And from there I got onto Doctor Who. So actually my story is very, very useless in telling people about like a useful trajectory into the industry. I just got super lucky, and I think it's really useful to acknowledge. Well, I would say it's useful to acknowledge that, because I think a lot of people kind of hide when lucky things happen to them. But yes, basically I got very lucky, but I did also spend a lot of years making a lot of popcorn. So
would your advice for, just listening to what you just said, would your advice for sort of pitching be to be quite flexible as a writer and a creative? Because as you said, they gave you a sort of rough idea of what they wanted, and I imagine you went back and forth a little bit maybe on what the final outcome would be, or how did you find that?
I didn't actually, and actually the things that I've gotten when I pitched, actually no, sometimes there's some back and forth, but mainly most of the time what's happened is they'll have something for you to respond to. So like with something like Murdered by My Father, it was like they want to do a one-off drama about an honor killing, which I didn't want to do, but I thought, oh, here is a thing in that I find interesting that I don't think I've seen. I think it comes, like, fundamentally it comes back to that thing I was saying a little bit earlier, that looking at that topic and going, if I didn't care about what's inherently like important about this, what is it that's interesting? So with Murdered by My Father, the thing I said to them was, hey, I think this is like A View from the Bridge. This is the thing I don't get. I don't get what goes on in that dad's head, and I think that's the useful thing for me to try and get at. and it reminded me, there's a Arthur Miller play called View from the Bridge, which I really love, and it is about pride, and it is about the way that weak men hold on to their status in a group. And I was like, I want to make it like that. Like I want it, that's the focus, like not the, like whatever sort of I don't know, like seediness around that title that I didn't really like, but the drama of what it means to do that to a person and where that comes from was the thing that I drove. And that's the thing I pitched really hard with that. With something else, an example, like they were saying, oh, here's a nice story of this nice guy who's like living this lovely life and learns a lot from community and then goes home. And I was like, okay, but what if that guy was a total, like, it's a young audience, but like not a very nice man. Like, actually, isn't it more interesting if he's not a very nice man? Because I think I'd like to see that version of that story more. So I think what you want to do with pitching is to go, one, don't assume that the people you're talking to are inherently interested in the things that interest you. So just try and push to a slightly more universal place. And that might be about feeling, it might be about a big idea. So like the cherry orchard is like the cherry orchard in space, right? Like that's a concept pitch. So you're pitching a good concept. Murdered by My Father was, here is an angle on the thing that you're presenting, like a character angle, which I think is interesting and maybe not seen. And then another thing I presented was a tonal suggestion, right? It was going, oh, I think this could be funnier and a bit sharp, a bit more edgy than I think you're interested in. And all of those speak to my interest, I guess, and the things that I care about in the world. But that's what you really want in a pitch, is understand what it is that fascinates you in that material. Like you don't have to go, yes, I will do this thing exactly how you've sent it to me, or they are interested in what your take on it is. And then the second thing is just be able to think about how you can clearly communicate that to someone who doesn't assume that they don't have the same basis knowledge as you. Sometimes they might, and that's great, but assume that they don't and think about how you can convey that idea to someone who doesn't know anything about it at all.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Just jump in. Oh, sorry, no, we got a hand raised.
Okay, my question is, do you get to go on set when your scripts are being acted?
Such a good question.
Yes, you can do. The thing is, set is really boring as a writer, which sounds really surprising, I know. Like it's really exciting for about 10 minutes and then you realize there's lots of people who are trying to do lots of things and they're really busy and you've got nothing to do. You're just sort of like a luxury person sort of hanging around and like being a little bit dazzled. So it is kind of, obviously it's really nice. And like with Doctor Who, I got to go to like the south of Spain when we were shooting the first one, but it did become very, you feel very useless very quickly as a writer, unless you're like a producer as well, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, you can more often than not. It's just that thing of there is no reason for you to be there in telly. It's exciting.
Who's the most famous person you've met on set, if you did go?
Who's the most famous person I've met? Like, I don't know. I've met Prince William, but that wasn't on a set. I guess I think that's probably going to be the best I can do.
What's he like then?
Who's the most famous person I've met on set? I guess Jodie Whittaker. Like, I don't know if I could do better than that. Let me think. When I was a runner, did I meet anyone really exciting? I was a runner on a S Club 7 shoot when I was 15 years old, and that was very exciting, but I don't think S Club 7 is very exciting for you. But at the time, it was very, very exciting. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, I don't have any super famous people stories. I'm sure actually I'll come off this story. I was like, oh my God, I met that amazing person. But yeah, no, actually Jodie is very great and very nice person, so I'll say her.
Funny enough, I was before I did Mrs. C's, where I was introduced to Vinay, I think it was like a year before. I don't know how long it was, but I was actually sat in the same theatre as Vinay watching Mouthpiece, and I remember looking behind me, and Vinay was sat there, and Peter Capaldi, who was Doctor Who at the time, was sat in the same row, and I was like, wow, this is and it was like, don't draw attention to it, you know, be subtle. And then halfway through the performance, there's this bit of the show where all the lights come up and it's on the audience, and like I can tell Peter's there trying to keep it on the down low, and then suddenly like all the attention is on the audience, and it's just yeah.
Yeah, and I met Kieran, who wrote that last week when I was in Glasgow, actually. And he was I think I might have relayed that story to him. I was like, oh yes, just told that, and because they're both from Glasgow, is the exciting thing. Yeah.
Quick question, because you've worked obviously in both screen and stage, and I'm learning more about screen now because I'm doing like an ITV mentorship, so I'm learning sort of about the process of writing for screen and how kind of it's a collective, you know, the whole storylining department, and you have to sort of go through. It's like you have to go through a whole team of people before you get anything on screen. But then again, I'm sure it's kind of like that in theatre. Would you say there's more freedom in theatre or screen? And this is a question that most writers get asked, but what do you think the main differences are from writing for theatre, writing for screen?
Sure. So like the joke I always crack at this moment is that nothing makes you want to write for theatre like writing for telly, because it's a super convoluted process. There's loads of notes, there's loads of people with lots of opinions about everything. I think TV is more of a machine, like it is a thing of trying to, like, we have to get this thing done by this certain point, or we have to ask ourselves what our audience is interesting for. So if you want to pitch an idea for telly, for example, you have your idea, but then you're also going to specific channels who have specific ideas of what their audience looks for, and then you have to shift your idea to suit that in a way that you don't necessarily have to do in theatre. So there is a, you know, it's a bit of a classic answer, I guess, but there's a purity in theatre in terms of intention that you can find, which is how you end up writing a 3-hour long play with 2 intervals, which I would never have done that if I hadn't written telly for ages. But it's just, yeah, I think telly is really good at driving story, and I think theatre, for me, I am most excited about it when it contains a mood, right? I think that's why I'm really interested in Chekhov, because a lot of Chekhov's characters don't really do a whole lot, but they sort of sit with a feeling with an audience, and I think that's really hard for telly to replicate, because it just, one, it's not a space, so it can't kind of, yeah, it can't hold feeling the same way, and it just has to move, more often than not, has to move quite fast, because that's what people want. So I think just increasingly, that's for me the thing I find is the biggest difference. I think also, just for myself, there's a big difference in intention. So I probably said this to you last time, so forgive me if I've repeated it, but when I was talking about audiences and what people know and what they don't, something like Murdered by My Father is like a harrowing piece of telly, but I would never write it as a play because I don't think it would find the audience that it would need to reach. Whereas as much as I dislike the title when I first heard it, because that was given to me, that being a BBC Three commission was incredibly useful, because it meant that it had a broader reach. It meant that it would reach some people who maybe don't understand anything that's about at all, which is good. It meant that there were, like, there's the charities that we work with got a lot more calls about things. So hopefully some people got help through it. And in that sense, it becomes a piece of advocacy drama, right? So telly is really, really good at getting across something that you think is important on a very visceral level, and by which I mean, like, here's a thing that you might end up in trouble with, or you might need help with. Telly is brilliant for that. Whenever EastEnders does anything about domestic abuse, like, helpline calls go up like significantly. So and I find when we talk about the politics of work, for me that's incredibly political and incredibly useful and incredibly valuable for society. So I think telly is just brilliant at doing that in particular, like in a very, very specific way. I think theatre is just a really exciting place to have ideas. Like telly, you can sort of do it, but it'll cost you millions to kind of get to. So, like, you know, I could do a 3-hour play that crosses 3 continents at Bush and is about what it means to find hope and love across trying circumstances, including your own arranged marriage. As a TV drama, that would take me 4 years to get away. I'd go through tons of commissioners. It'd be super expensive. It's not returnable, so no one would ever want to do it unless either I was famous or I could put someone famous in it. So if you want a broad canvas earlier in your career, there is definitely a place that's good. Like, obviously that it's still quite expensive to do stuff like that. But I just think if you have big ideas, especially early on, theatre is such a brilliant place to not just get them up, but also think about, there's a real joy in trying to go, how do I find a way of turning that big idea into like a theatrical image or like a moment between two people? There's a real joy in that limitation. Yeah, I think that's probably enough. But yeah, telly is for me a place, especially now it's getting more novelistic, like you can tell slightly bigger stories, more likely than you could before, but it's still harder to access that when you're just starting out, whereas theatre is there to do that from the jump, which is, I think, exciting.
Go for it.
Sorry, I think this is my last question.
I have to apologise.
As a writer, do you ever get any input on the casting?
You can do. So in theatre, it's a little bit easier, although every time I've had that, they've forgotten to invite me to the casting and I've had to go, hey, you guys are casting today, I'd love to come along and see people. So yes, ideally in theatre should definitely be the case. Telly and film is a little bit more difficult. In film, the director will probably have a bigger say on that more than anyone. In telly, it will be the director to a degree, but probably the executive producer, so the person who's like running the whole thing. You do have a thing now where writers are also the writers and those producers, so they do get that say in casting. But yeah, again, that can take you a couple of years to get into. I was very lucky with Doctor Who, actually, in that I knew a lot of people who'd be good for it and was able to recommend. Like, I think if you're working with someone good, they'll always be open to hearing your suggestions anyway, which is really nice. You don't always get to work with someone that good or open. But yeah, you should, if you're in theatre, you should always expect to be in on the casting. In telly, always hope to be in on the casting.
Thank you.
I have a.
So very quickly, sorry, one just remind me, sorry. When we did Murdered by My Father, it happened so fast. I got hired in May, we were shooting in October, so the casting was really, we had to think about who we were casting before I could finish writing the script. And that was really interesting because I was writing it for someone, the lead guy who did it was a guy called Adil Akhtar, who's a beautiful actor, but mostly like a very comic actor. And he wasn't who I had in my head at all. So us having that conversation about casting ahead of, like, literally we had to go talk to him before I finished the script. I had to go and pitch him essentially what I wanted it to be, which was quite scary. But it was really, I was very lucky that the producers there were like, oh, here's what knowing who that guy was helped me write that script towards his strengths or towards the unusual aspects of what you might expect from that person as a presence. So yeah, it's not just a hopeful thing. It's also sometimes in telly, especially, that could be the first thing that happens. Like I'm writing a project right now where literally all I had was the actor and was building the story around that particular guy. So it can happen in reverse. Sorry, I just remember that. Anyway, sorry.
I had a question. When you're writing, if you're writing with people, how does it work? Do you all kind of put some ideas together and then you like choose? How does it just work?
So do you mean like when you're co-writing with one other person or like a writer's room with it? So, or both? I can try and talk about
both.
Okay. So yeah, like writing with another person, that will always depend on your dynamic. Like I know a lot of people who do like, they'll write a whole script, pass it on to a friend. They will then do their version of it and they'll send it back. So it can work like that. I know people who go, hey, I'll do these scenes and you do these scenes. And then they write it and they put it together and they try and filter it between them. I know some people where it's like a head, there'll be one person who writes most of it and the other person is there to punch up the script a little bit. So it's like, if it's like going, hey, I'm really good with structure and drama and you're like the funny one, like basically that person will do like most of the script and the other person will do all the jokes. Like you can find lots of different ways of making that work. It's just a question of you speaking with your friend, who will hopefully remain a friend after the process, and asking yourselves, what is it that we think our strengths are, and if you don't know, if you're not sure, or you don't want to have that could be quite awkward conversation, I would default to going, I will take either, I'll do one run at the script and then you take a run at it, like you edit it and I'll edit that, or just divide up scenes ahead of time. Like do one of those two things when you're starting out, I think, and then you'll find another process that might suit you, depending on what you're doing and who you are. What writers' rooms. So depending on who the person running it is and how authoritarian they are, like it can be very different. But more often than not, what it is they will go, here is what I roughly think this episode is about, say, and you'll throw ideas into, you know, people just start saying things. Oh, wouldn't it be interesting if this happened, or wouldn't it be interesting if that happened? And someone would be like, might add to it and go, yeah, and then we do this, and then like, so a concrete example, so on Doctor Who, like we had a board where we had like all our cool ideas, and then we had a board where we try and put those ideas into a sort of shape for a story. But in the initial stages, it is just everyone just sort of throwing out their ideas. And then what you need is, because otherwise it's chaos, you do need a voice in that room, which is ideally the showrunner or the head writer going, that is a great idea, that's a great idea, we're going to go with this idea. Which is the slightly trickier thing, because you're not, if you have a nice room and everyone understands that you're there to just like make the best thing possible, then knocking people's ideas isn't like, it's not saying that they're bad, it's just like you're all trying to contribute, and then like on another episode someone else will have like the brilliant idea. But yeah, you need one person making the calls, but before that it's generally just a lot of people going, hey, I think this would be really interesting, and go. And then what will happen from there is you write the episode up into an outline, which is just like a very basic document going, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and that gets assigned to a different writer depending on who the showrunner decides is the right person for it, or someone who's gone, oh, I'm really interested in that, I'd love to write that episode, and they'd get assigned it. So it's a little bit more complicated that way around, but I think in both of those cases, if you're lucky, again, everyone gets to have their voice heard, which is nice.
But would you run the risk of if different people were writing the scenes, would it sound quite different? Because some people write quite differently. Yeah.
So then it's the are you talking about two people working together? Is that
yeah, if there's two people working together, let's say half of them did the start and one did the second, would it sound quite different because some people write in a lot of different styles?
So that's when handing the script between each other is really useful. So what will happen is you'll do half, they'll do half, you'll put it together, and then one of you will take a run at trying to basically unify it, make it like how you think it would sound, and then the other person will go, well, this is how I think it sounds, and then you have some arguments and you decide like what is it that you're and when you have those arguments, which can be really constructive, you go, what is it that we're actually trying to do? Like, what is the intention of that line? What are we trying to get across? So whoever's got like the clearest read on it usually wins, or it becomes, that joke's funnier, so you can have it. You don't want to be in a situation where you both think your joke's funnier. That does happen, and it is really frustrating. And then you just sort of like, I have flipped a coin with someone's like, sure, we'll go with that joke. But it is hard to do that. And like on a show where you have a writer's room, the showrunner's job will be to make sure the voices across the different episodes written by different people are all unified and sound the same. Sometimes that can be quite easy. Sometimes people write so differently it can be a bit trickier. But yeah, eventually it's a negotiation when you're with each other to try and find that blend, and then on a bigger show it'll just more likely than not the guy or gal who's running it will just find their own voice to it.
Oh, okay, that makes sense now. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really weird process, isn't it?
Any more questions? I mean, okay, so you've done quite a few realms. You've done theatre, you've done screen. What, say if you could have like a dream project, what would you do?
Ooh, I get like, so I started off wanting to direct, so I think I'll probably end up, my dream project will end up with me directing features. But I'm kind of, this is like a really like sloppy answer. I think I'm doing my dream projects right now. Because like that version of the Cherry Orchard is kind of like a dream project. That Star Wars play is kind of a dream project. Like every time I sit down to write them, I'm really excited by them. So I think for me, that's a dream project. But I think a dream as an abstract idea in my head that I think will make me happy, but might probably end up turning out to be a nightmare. It'll probably be writing, directing features. But I'm loving all the things I'm doing at the moment. I'm very grateful I'm lucky to be in that position. It hasn't always been the case. Like I'm just sort of there now, and I've deliberately made it the case. But yeah, so I'm very lucky.
Wicked. I think Hiba's got a question.
Why do writers often become producers?
Because they go crazy with people interfering with their work. Basically. So what'll happen is like that in telly is that you will write something, it will go to someone else, they will do something with it that you don't love, and then that gets put out sometimes with your name on it, and you're like, if you're lucky, they made it way better, and then you can just take the kudos and no one needs to know. If you're very unlucky though, it'll be worse and it'll come out with your name in it, and that's deeply frustrating. And it's happened because you've had, so I wrote a thing that the tone of it was a kind of comedy drama, and it was like very very dark and then very funny and very dark and very funny, and that was kind of the shape of it, and that's kind of what made it work. But when it got made, it was like this kind of strange thriller thing that like had no humor in it and like had no heart, and I hated it so much, so much, that I was like, I can never let that happen again. So there are people who are just completely egomaniacs, right? So that's why those people become producers. But I've seen it happen time and time again. People who are trying to like not be that person, basically they'll have something they really liked that's been disrupted or messed up in a way, and so they come to a place of understanding the only way sometimes to get the purity of a certain idea or vision through is, cat just throwing up a hairball, what a lovely thing. But like the only way to get that purity of vision is to produce it yourself. And yeah, sometimes the most wonderful thing you can find in the world is a producer who understands exactly what you're doing, because they are like gold dust. But more often than not, yeah, you'll eventually become frustrated to the extent that you'll end up wanting to take up that role. But yeah, it's a really natural thing, and it's happening more and more and more, and it's a more usual path as well. So you might find yourself there.
Sorry, so I'm going to throw this in there only because I know people watch this will be like, right, so they've spoken about theatre, they've spoken about film. And if I recollect, one of the bad experiences was in radio. I think you spoke about it last. But like, so yeah, radio. What's it like to write for radio? Because I know there will be some people watch this who are interested in getting into that medium.
Yeah, so I've not written a huge amount for radio. The thing about radio is that it's changing a lot. So before, the route for drama on the radio was all through BBC. Either Radio 3 had some drama slots, and Radio 4 has like an afternoon drama every day. And when I was looking at it, like it all went through like one commissioner, like one person basically got to decide what the good ideas they were interested in were, which is incredibly frustrating. But obviously, like the way that you have so many podcast dramas now and other companies that are able to step in and do that, that world has opened up, and you get more. There are more interesting ways of recording things. People are really putting in the money and time to invest in that, which is really exciting. But as a medium, again, it's slightly that thing with theatre where you can like write something huge and that can be really fun. Like the last thing I wrote for radio was a collaboration with High Tide. They recorded it live and Radio 3, and that was a thing about it was set in 3 time periods. One was the modern day coast of Suffolk. One was 5,000 years ago when the channel, the sea near the coast of Suffolk was land. It wasn't, there was no ocean there. And it's about people moving across that place. And then the third strand was set 300 years in the future when that place is completely flooded at a higher level than the sea was before, which was really fun. And it was just all 3 different locations and 3 completely different time periods, and something again that would be super expensive to do on film and telly, but was really fun to do on radio because you had to try and invoke all of those places using just sound, and the challenge of that is really exciting. And really, I love the proximity and intimacy of radio. Like there's this monologue called Seawall, which is like the Simon Stevens play, and the thing I always say about that is it has Andrew Scott doing it, and when they did it, I saw it at the Shed at the National, and I hated it there because like there was a huge audience and they were kind of laughing. When you have a famous person doing a thing on a stage, everyone sort of laughs before the joke is actually there, and that's really frustrating. Whereas they did a filmed version of it, which I stripped the audio from, and I just sort of listened to it as I walked around town, and that was like my favorite version of that play. And for me, like good radio can be like this incredibly intimate, exciting thing in your ear that's just kind of telling you a secret. And I think that's the part of radio that gets really, really excited. But in terms of the process, yeah, it's pretty singular in terms of the BBC, and they've cut some slots as well. But there's obviously a lot more people coming in and doing that as well. And so I think radio is a really exciting thing audio drama is a really exciting space to write for, especially if you're just starting out as well, because again, you can just do anything.
Any other questions? Danelle, do you have any other questions? Hibba, you got your hand up virtually.
Let's say I'm writing a script. Would I start with structure or the scenes?
Can depend. So I've had things that I've written that have been started from like 2 people talking, right, and going, that's a scene I'm interested in, what are they talking about, oh, that's exciting, like, and then you build out from there. And then I've had stuff where I've gone like, I'm really interested in this idea, but I don't know what that looks like in terms of characters and story, or so I'll kind of interrogate it a little bit and try and go, oh, I think I'd love to see a thing where someone goes from this to this, and then that suggests the structure. I think I would say, though, in the first instance, don't worry about structure when you're starting off a script. Again, try and look for the thing that excites you in it. Look for the thing that compels you. Write loads and loads of like nonsense if you need to. Just try and hone in on what it is that you're interested in, and from there, the structure will start suggesting itself a little bit more. Because I think like you have obviously lots of screenwriting manuals in particular, and people talking about this is how here are the beats of which the story exists in, and that can kind of work, but it's also like I think it can deaden an idea really quickly. So I'll give you an example. So like the play I did at the Bush was, again, it's a sort of like a triptych. There are 3 big scenes, acts. One was 9 scenes, one was 5 scenes, and one was 3 scenes. And I was trying to create a sensation of a life slowing down. So it's like really exciting when you're really fast when you're younger, then it gets a little bit slow, and then the same, they're all like around an hour long, but the 3 scene one obviously feels slower because they're not moving as fast. So there was a real intention in terms of the structure there, but that didn't come for ages, right? The thing that I started with was, here are 2 kids who think a country doesn't work for them. They're going to be in love and want to get the hell out of there, right? And that was like the energy where that play started. I think if I tried to be a little bit too cute and clever by going, I really want to create a play where like this, has this structure to it, I think I probably would have killed it. But you can have, so like, I've written a play that was a specific triptych, and that is where a structure, you do start with a structure, right? So, and a triptych is, again, three acts, which can sometimes be completely unrelated, right? And so there are play forms in particular where the style and the structure of it is part of what the play is. And so in those play, then you can go, okay, what's the three interesting stories there that sit in it? And I guess maybe that's starting the structure. But I think more often than not, you kind of want to start with character and intention, and then you can maybe find an exciting structure that speaks to the story that you eventually come up with. But yeah, so if you have to pick between one of the two, I default to characters in a scene.
Yeah, I think the play you're referencing, sorry, is an adventure, isn't it? Like that kind of 3-act structure. And for the participants who haven't read it yet, I'd highly recommend reading it, because it's a great study of kind of that structure and kind of the arc. And the ending is very poetic, and there's some great characterization. And just on that, because obviously I'm gathering from obviously the before word, you know, how you introduce the piece. Obviously, there's a lot of truth in it. It's sort of like close to bone. It's about kind of family and history and heritage. And you know, you hear often this term, you know, thrown around. You know, write your truth, or write what you know. And I suppose my question is, because it can be hard sometimes writing about issues that are close to you, is how do you go about kind of broaching those subject matters that are close to you and writing your truth, so to speak?
Yeah. So first off, I would say for me, an adventure was an exercise in indulgence, but in a way that I really liked. So when I first started writing it, Madney Eunice, who was the artistic director at the Bush at the time, who commissioned me to write it, he said, there's a tight 90-minute version, two-hander version of this play. Don't write that version. And that to me, because the thing that happens, right, and more often than not, if you come from a background that you think people aren't going to be very interested in, there's a real temptation to go, how do I make my story as palatable as possible to a broad audience? And that can be like any sort of but it's just like, if you think you don't have a confidence in that being a mainstream story, there can be a real pressure, both internally and externally, to present that in a really palatable way. For me, with something like an adventure, it took me a long time to be confident enough to go, some people are going to hate how I've done this, right? But what I really wanted to do was go, the truth that I was trying to get at was, I wanted to present that these people had extraordinary epic lives, and the only way to get the sense of that, the truth of that, was to make it a long play, to feel like a life moving with them through a lifetime. And so for me, finding the truth there and presenting that was to adopt a form that I thought was the most potent expression of that thing that I cared about, whilst also kind of accepting that it wasn't necessarily going to be like the most commercial vehicle for doing that. Whereas like, you know, with like Doctor Who, like it's slightly the opposite, right? It's going, how do I find a way to tell a story of partition through Doctor Who? And that the truth for me there, like the thing that I knew about that event that I thought I wanted to try and get across was, one, it tore apart communities that were very close, when suddenly, and the truth in there is suddenly someone comes along and tells you this part of your identity is the most important part of you, even though that was never in your head before. Suddenly that becomes a thing. So for me, that was the truth of it. And then two, the thing about no one really knows the numbers of it, that to me was like the most upsetting thing, is the rounding error on that moment in history is like 1 million people. So there's like 1 million people that may or may not have died in that, right? Which formed, well, not trying to ruin it, but like formed how I use the sci-fi element in that, and the understanding that those people had some sort of recognition somewhere in space and time. So I think in terms of presenting your truth, yeah, it is. I think there's more appetite for people trying to do that in the way that they want to, and I only say this because like I've just seen with a lot of theatre makers, especially, they've had their stories railroaded into an acceptable shape. That doesn't mean like you should be like super in the go, this is going to be 1 billion hours long. Because like my first draft of that play was 4.5 hours long, which is way too long for sure, right? But it is that thing of going, you can find a neat marriage between the story you want to tell and the reason you want to tell it in a certain way, and making it something that people will still enjoy. Like, I don't think I'm really interested in the audience. I don't think I'm not someone who will want to put them through something I don't think they'll like. But for me, the truth will always trump the palatability. Whereas I think maybe when I was younger or just starting out, I was so obsessed with the idea of going, no one is interested in things I'm interested in. And I know I've said that already, of like, how do you talk about it, of being, if someone isn't interested in it? But that doesn't mean you have to go wholesale in that direction. I think if there's something that you really care about and it's a truth that really matters to you, if there isn't a way of expressing that you just know for sure in your heart, that is the only way to get the full sense of that across, you should always go with that and don't compromise on that, because you will hate yourself if you do. Because like, I mean, like with adventure in particular, like that is a fictionalized version of my grandparents' generation and those people, and I just knew I'd never get another swing at it. Like, this is the only chance I'm going to get to do this story, might as well. Like, if someone's offering me the chance to do it in a way that I think is and the thing is, like, and me finding the confidence to do that and going, this is the way to tell that truth, that's the thing that let me feel confident enough to adapt to Chekhov in that way, which I would never have felt like going, because Chekhov is very much about, again, mood and sitting in the place and not, you know, long times, not much happening. But I would never have felt confident getting there if I hadn't stuck to my guns on the truth. So yeah, just I think it is a thing of being very certain about what you want to say, and if you're very certain about that, it makes it easier to sell a certain way of telling it. But you have to be clear on that for people to like go along with it. I think that's the only thing you owe them, is the clarity.
Any other questions from our participants? Anything at all that might spring to mind?
Oh no, I was gonna ask, like, what kind of tips you would give to someone that was trying to like aspire to be a scriptwriter?
Read lots of scripts. Read lots of scripts of things that you think you're not interested in, because you might find that the writer you think you are will probably not turn out to be the writer you actually do become. I would say, so the most useful thing I did was, when I was starting out, was when I was doing those theatre scratch nights, every single time I did a new like 5-10 minute piece, I'd set myself a different challenge each time. So I'd go, oh, this one has to have like 100 scenes in it, right, in 10 minutes, like what is that story? Or this one has to sustain just 2 characters talking with nothing else happening, or this one has to be completely silent, or this has like a piece I did myself as, this has me dropping my trousers at the end, like what's the story that gets me to there, right? Always like, so I would push at the edges of what you think you're good at and what your style is, and because then you might find that actually there's something else that you might like. So don't assume things about yourself, is what I think I'm trying to get at. And keep, be versatile, be open to other style of things. You know, Owen Wilson started off as an action star, right, behind enemy lines, and now he's like the funny guy. Would never, if he would never found that in himself. And that's the same thing with writers, is you got to be open to the writer that you might be. And the only way you'll do that is, to read lots, write lots, and just push yourself and not make an assumption on who you are. And if you can identify things, like I wrote up a thing of things I thought I was bad at, and I made attempts at writing things that tried to work really hard on those things. And sometimes what will happen is you'll go, oh, actually, that's not me being bad at that. I just don't like that. Like, I don't want to do that. And that's when, like, that, you know, the dreaded, we're like, here's my style, right? That's where that comes from, is going, I'm just very sure that I'm not doing that because I don't like it, as opposed to I just can't do it. So if you find things that you think you're bad at, definitely target those as well. So that was very rambly. To sum that up, read a lot around, challenge yourself with with a different thing in every script, and don't make assumptions about yourself.
Thank you. I'll definitely keep it as a man.
I completely forgot Owen Wilson was in Behind Enemy Lines. I wiped that from my memory.
I think, yeah, I mean, everyone younger than us will not know, but yeah, it was an absurd movie with him being shot down an F-16. I think in the Bosnian, it was something in Eastern Europe.
Very forestry area, wasn't it? It was like,
yeah. And it's a weird thing, like looking at him now and going, oh yeah, they were trying to make you an action star. Like most times it's the other way around, right? They turn Nicolas Cage into an action star, or like, but it was like a very, but I sort of love that. Like I love that people can have that versatility, but I also love that people needed to go through that phase of going, oh no, wait, I am not Owen Wilson, the action star. I am Owen Wilson, the funny guy.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it now, though, with that in mind, because like I'm gonna see it in a completely different light. Because obviously, when I was younger, when I watched it when it first came out, I was very young. I didn't know who he was. Obviously, he's just some random actor, right? But now, knowing what I know about him, I'll probably go back and probably laugh even harder because I'll be like, this is hilarious.
You're just waiting for him to say, it's like there are no jokes, there's only chaos because it's war.
Yeah.
Like that's
It makes it more enjoyable. So Vinay, you've given us so much great advice tonight and such great insight. I'm gonna ask you, so in the sci-fi kind of theme, so if you had a time machine, okay, and you can go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, if you give yourself one piece of advice that you wish you would have had years ago, but now you've got all this experience and understanding, what would it be?
Just do the thing. Like I was just very unconfident when I was younger, and I wish I wasn't. Like it's a bit hard to erase that because I only got the confidence from being a little bit older and doing other things in the world. And I actually wouldn't change my path for the world because I like who it's made me. But I think there are a lot of bad scripts written by very confident people. Like I say that as someone who's like read lots and lots of things. And I don't mean they're bad because they're confident. I think they're bad because they aren't inquisitive in the right way. So if you're feeling like, I would tell myself when I was younger, the reason you're hesitant is because you want it to be good and you are interested in the process of making it good, but you just don't know how to get there. And so, but the thing I think I'd assumed when I was younger, there'll be a point where I would just know. I would just go like, oh, that's how you write a good thing. But genuinely, everything I write is bad. The first draft of everything I write is bad. Every time I think I've beaten that trap, I never have. And I have it, I don't know if I explained this last time, but like I have a drawer with all my first drafts in it. And it's just, I look at it whenever I'm feeling really cocky with the script and go, no, every time it's bad in that first draft. So the only way to actually get better is to just do it. And it will be like, I got sent something I wrote when I was like 13. Like, it's so bad. But I'll tell you what, one of those things has a really great little idea in it, which I've used in something later, and it's works brilliantly now. But I would not have had that idea if I didn't do all the bad stuff. So you just got to go through the bad stuff. You got to let yourself be rubbish, especially and not So don't put too much pressure on yourself, because I think, sorry, that just as an aside, I think a lot of people get hung up on the idea of, this is the script that's going to do it for me. And if it doesn't, I'm in trouble, or like it means I'm awful. And the thing that I've consistently found, weirdly enough, is it's always the scripts I never expected to quite be the thing that have had the longest longevity, or have done different things for me, or brought opportunities. So even the stuff that you think is bad, there'll always be something in it. So yeah, just keep at it.
It's trial and error, really, isn't it? Like, I completely agree. Like I've and still to this day, I've written and looked back at plays and you're like, but as you say, it's all part of the process. You have to have those moments.
I think people, I had no access to writers, or like, I think things are different now. I had no idea how any of it worked. So I think I was like, you're either a genius or like, you're not going to be a writer, right? Whereas the most liberating thing I've discovered is most people aren't. Some people are, and they're very annoying. They write very well, and they write very fast. You'll never be them. That's fine. But for more often than not, it is about the process, and that feels very freeing. It's going, I've done this draft. I had this experience. Like the last thing I've shared with you guys is like with that Chekhov adaptation. The first draft I wrote with that, right? is I transposed the story to this new setting, and that draft was fine. Like, it wasn't great, but it did do the job of transport. The second draft of it bolstered some of the characters and made them a little bit different and a bit more to what I wanted, and that was good. People responded well to that. Third draft, I basically got the note to just like go for it, right, and just do what I wanted with it, and that was quite scary. But that is the draft that now, when it's gone out, everyone has responded super, super, super well to. But if they just saw that first draft, it'd be like, this is fine. Like, you know, it's an adaptation, you can't go super wrong. But it took the work of going to the third one. I didn't manage to hit the third one straight away. And it's not me saying that's like the best play in the world either. I'm just saying that that response change is something I try and hold on to me, because I know that response that people are having to it is not because I'm a brilliant writer. It's because I put myself through the process and ask myself the right questions of going, what is it that I think I can do better in this draft and I want to shift? And eventually it pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the process and remaining committed to it. And I think that's really sage advice, like what you say, like, just because you've written one play and it's not the one, you know, it doesn't, you know, the next one could be the one, because you could have learned so much from that one. You know, it's all a stepping stone. And I think that's something, I think for every artist, it's all, regardless of age, to bear in mind that you can't fall at the first hurdle. It is a process. Commit yourself to it and it'll pay off.
And also, just like the industry is weird and whimsical, so like you might eventually do something and someone will look back at that first play and go, wow, actually this is genius. Right? So it's not even a thing of, don't put in your head that there are people who know and there are people who don't, and the people who know are always right. That just isn't true. Like, they can give you good advice, but it doesn't mean that they can see the thing that you've done, or the greatness or the good things in it straight away. So even if they reject things, that's not the play necessarily being bad. Sometimes it might be, for sure, but not always. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. It's not a rejection of you as a person. And in fact, sometimes they might be completely wrong. It's a bit like, you know, when you were like a kid and you realized your parents are wrong for the first time, and maybe some of you are going through that process right now, it blows your mind, right? You're like, what? You are supposed to be the ones with the answers. If you don't know, no one knows. And you have that moment with the industry really quickly. So yeah, don't fret too much.
I think we had someone there just go, yeah, you were wrong. Let's open up a can of worms. That is all the parents listening in the background going, no. But no, it's great to hear that from someone as established as yourself, and who's had, you know, really good like kind of track record and success, and you've done some amazing things. But it's always, you know, great to hear that, because, you know, rejection is a big part of the industry, you know, and I don't think that ever stops, you know.
No, never stops. No, like literally, even every single famous person, you know, either as a writer or an actor, still gets rejected. They just don't hear about it as much because they're doing loads of other stuff. Like, and I think that actually that's maybe a really useful place to sort of like end on, is to go, rejection is part of it, and it doesn't mean they're rejecting you. And just the other thing about scripts is sometimes they come along in the wrong moment, and that is a slightly harder thing to take, but that does mean sometimes someone will look back and go, oh, wait a minute, that play makes loads of sense now in a way it might not have done then. So basically none of the work that you do on those things is ever wasted, both in terms of the ideas you generate, but also just the fact that there's always the possibility that it finds a space or a home later when you don't expect it.
Is there any more burning questions from anyone? Any burning questions that... Nicole, do you have anything?
No, I was just kind of, I think that was a very kind of nice note to kind of end on, because it's so right, you know, like you could think of the most famous actor in the world and they will set their sights on a project that they hear about the same way that we do, and then they won't get that project, they'll get rejected and they'll do something else. And it's funny because that something else is what they win the Oscar for. And I kind of think that's a really good way at looking at the industry, is that not every opportunity that you feel like you need is actually what you need. Yeah, really good note.
You have to be open to things. So like with Murdered by My Father, I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to put that story into the world, but finding in myself, when I was like, oh, this is what a charity wants, and I think I can be useful to them, then that product went from something I never wanted to do to something I'm really proud of. And I just never expected that to be the case. So yeah, like you have to be open to, in the same way that other people don't know best about your own work, sometimes you don't necessarily know best about what you might find yourself in and do great at. So yeah, just always be open to those opportunities.
Lovely.
Coolio. In that case, then, if we have no more questions from our participants, Hiba says,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for today. It was really helpful. Thank you. And thank you for attending, Hiba. Thank you for all your brilliant questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinay, for giving up your evening this evening. We all very much appreciate it. It's been very insightful, very interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot from taking part. And thank you to all our participants that also gave up their evening to join in. I hope you found it equally as insightful and interesting. Yeah, so thank you all, basically.
Thanks, everyone. Allowed to get disappointed by football.
Yes.
Yeah, I save all my work. Thank you. See you later, guys.